We're going to begin with a momentous day for our nation's highest court. It is now official. Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer appeared with President Joe Biden today to announce his retirement. Biden says he'll make a decision on his nominee to replace Breyer by the end of February.
I'm going to invite senators from both parties to offer their ideas and points of view. I'll also consult with leading scholars and lawyers. And I'm fortunate to have advising me in this selection process Vice President Kamala Harris. She's an exceptional lawyer, former Attorney General of the state of California, a former member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I will listen carefully to all the advice I'm given, and I'll study the records and former cases carefully.
So that's how the president says he's going to make this decision. He also says he'll keep his promise. The nominee will be a black woman. And joining us now to talk about what's next, ABC News Chief Congressional Correspondent Rachel Scott, ABC News Political Director Rick Klein, and ABC News contributor Leah Wright-Rigueur, Professor of History at Johns Hopkins University. Rachel, let me begin with you. President Biden making it clear there he hopes to include Republicans in this process, and that's very typical of the way he does business. Is there any indication, though, without knowing who the nominees might be, that any Republicans are going to be open to a discussion or maybe even a vote for a Biden nominee?
Yeah, well, right now, Terry, I can tell you that there appears to be a handful of Republican senators that are at least keeping an open mind, that they want to learn more, and they're open to having these discussions with the White House. One of them is Senator Susan Collins. Now, after this news broke about Breyer stepping down and retiring, I'm told that Senator Dick Durbin, who chairs the Judiciary Committee, actually called her, wanted to have a conversation about the timeline, how this process would go. He promised her that it was going to be fair and balanced. He wanted to get her input on this. She says that she is keeping an open mind on this. But you have others like Senator Lindsey Graham, who just flat out said, look, elections have consequences. Democrats don't need Republican support in order to get President Biden's nominee through the Senate as long as they stay united. They could get this through with a simple majority vote. 51 votes. Vice President Kamala Harris could potentially cast a tie-breaking vote in this.
And Stephen Breyer, Leah Wright-Rigueur, if I could ask you about Justice Breyer there in the press conference today, offered his understanding, as he has to high school students and college students and law students, he says, on the future of this divided nation and the divided court that he is leaving. He tried to remind us that Washington and Lincoln and so many other American leaders have talked about our system of democracy as, quote, an experiment. Take a listen.
It's an experiment that's still going on. And I'll tell you something. You know who will see whether that experiment works? It's you, my friend. It's you, Mr. High School student. It's you, Mr. College student. It's you, Mr. Law School students. It's us, but it's you. It's that next generation and the one after that. My grandchildren and their children. They'll determine whether the experiment still works. And of course, I am an optimist, and I'm pretty sure it will.
He's an optimist. Maybe optimism is generational right now. He does remind us that democracy in America is provisional. It could end. We just saw last January 6th some people who certainly wanted to change the fundamental terms of it, that the person who gets the most votes gets to win. Is there any indication that the court that he leaves, the country, is going to move away from this kind of polarization anytime soon?
Well, I should start by saying, once again, Justice Breyer, if you're listening, you have an open invitation to attend my class anytime that you want. Would love to have you and love to have your insights. But I think one of the things that Justice Breyer is picking up on and has been pretty vocal, or as vocal as he can be in public about, is this, you know, the extent of the polarization and partisanship that is really defining this country. And then, of course, the threat to democracy that has been shaking our country now, not just on January 6th, not just a year ago, but for quite some time. I think that, in particular, these kind of fissures in democracy that Justice Breyer has been picking up on, or at least is trying to highlight, is deeply alarming. And the Supreme Court is supposed to be a space where those kind of democratic questions can be argued over democratically, representationally, in ways that matter for the American people. And so I think Justice Breyer is an optimist here, because the person that replaces him will either be very similar to him ideologically or slightly to the left of him. But either way, it's still very much a divided court. It's still a court that tilts to the right. And there are still, I think, anti-democratic factions in this country that are determined to use the so-called nonpartisan court as an instrument to restrict democracy. So I do agree with Justice Breyer on the count that democracy is fragile. It can be brutal. It is something that should be protected, and the next Supreme Court justice really needs to keep that in mind.
An experiment that is still being conducted and tested every day. So, Rick, this is one of the biggest decisions a president can make. It will have an impact on the here and now, on his political standing. If the nominee is popular, it's not going to have a big impact, but it could, and certainly on the president's legacy. How does the president approach this decision, do you think, in the here and now, in the political dynamic, especially with some Democratic senators who haven't come along with him on some issues, and the rock-solid Republican opposition?
Terry, I think this is a fascinating question, and you heard the president today address it, essentially hearkening back to what he would acknowledge, and Justice Breyer would acknowledge, a bygone era when Democrats and Republicans could work together on things, when people like Justice Breyer could get north of 80 votes in confirmation. I don't think anyone's holding their breath to see anything like that. But what you do hear from the president is that he wants to use the advice side of advice and consent. The Constitution lays that out, that role for senators. Traditionally, presidents have gone and done what they want on their own in terms of who they're going to select. But in this case, he says he's going to consult. The president is going to consult with senators in both parties, get their input. The only decision he says he's made is he's going to choose a black woman. That, of course, limits the list pretty substantially. But beyond that, he is looking to foster the kind of conversations that in the past have allowed justices to get installed on the Supreme Court with big bipartisan majorities. And without knowing who the nominee is and how the politics are going to play out, he may have a window here, Terry, because we're 9-10 months away from an election that Republicans actually think they're going to do pretty well in, because we're talking about a seat, as Leah just pointed out, isn't going to change the balance of the court. It may be that Republicans kind of let this one slide or give a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. And you know, if you're the Democrats, that you have those 50 votes. So far in this, over the last year during the Biden presidency, no Democrat has voted against any of the Biden court nominees. So that is a cushion to fall back on if you have to do this with the barest of majorities.
And Rachel Scott, who covering Congress for us and covering this, I know you're talking to people up there. As you read the Senate, I mean, can you imagine if there were even just 4 or 5 Republicans who came along supporting a presidential Supreme Court nominee in this atmosphere? That would be considered pretty substantially bipartisan. As you look at the short list, how do you read it? How do you read the possibility that the president might get that?
Obviously depends on obviously who the president decides to pick here. But when you look at someone like Judge Childs, Congressman Jim Clyburn, he has been very vocal about her, pushing her forward. He thinks that could possibly get 5 to 6 Republicans, most notably the 2 South Carolina senators on board. Take a look at this, her experience in here. Born in Detroit, former employment lawyer. She's a mother of 2, University of South Carolina law graduate. And Terry, we have talked about this because she is also notable here because she differs from some of the others on this list and some of the others on the bench because of where she went to college, where she graduated from. Obviously, that education would diversify some of the education that we have seen on the bench, and that's exactly why progressives are pushing people like Childs. Take a look at the others on the list. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, 50 years old. She was actually confirmed with the support of 3 Republicans, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Lindsey Graham, spent 8 years on the U.S. District Court. She was appointed by President Obama in 2013. We have Leandra Kruger on here as well. She's a rising liberal star, 44 years old, a graduate of Yale and Harvard. The bottom line here is that we are talking about history, but there is no shortage of experience between this. This is going to be a very tough pick for President Biden.
It is indeed. And if he could get some votes, especially for a black woman, that would be significant, some Republican votes. It would make a statement to the country that I think most of the country would like. Leah, if I can turn to you on the subject of the president's promise. As I say, you think it's 2022. We're still talking about this kind of the first black woman on the Supreme Court. But there's a scarcity of black women serving as judges on the federal courts in general. Is this more than a symbolic nomination? Do you think it might open doors for others? And how big of an impact can it have on the struggle for true equality, where we don't have to say, oh, there's a historic first, where we just accept that a lot of voices, a lot of perspectives are going to be in these halls of power?
We know that representation actually can have a huge difference. In the case of ideological representation, the Supreme Court, right, over the past 4 or 5 years, has shifted to the right, right? These appointments, including Brett Kavanaugh, including Amy Coney Barrett, who were selected in part for their conservative bona fides, has had a huge impact on federal policy, on constitutional law. But also, we've seen a shift in terms of, at the lower level, in the lower courts. So we do know that representation matters, and it matters for both the right and the left. In the case of, Biden's Supreme Court pick and choosing a black woman, it goes beyond representation. It is actually righting a historic wrong. We know that previous presidential administrations and previous presidents have considered black women. We know several of the women that Biden is considering have already been shortlisted multiple times. But no president has had the vision, the courage, the fortitude, really the backbone to actually appoint a black woman. And this is particularly important when we think about the kind of cases that come before the Supreme Court. Now, I know most people are not familiar with all of these cases, but many of these cases find that black women are disproportionately affected by the outcomes. So now there will finally be someone on the Supreme Court that actually can speak to those issues, who has weighed in on them before. And that, in turn, I think, has a real impact, not just on representation and displays or symbolism, but also in actual concrete, material, lived experiences of people on the ground.
That's a great point. It's often said about the Supreme Court that with every new justice, the whole court changes. And you can't wait to see how this court will change once a black woman is confirmed by the United States Senate. Rick Klein, Rachel Scott, Leah Wright-Rigueur, thanks to all of you for that.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.